Have you noticed how there's a lot of negativity directed at fearful avoidant attachment style, meaning negativity and judgment directed at people, at us, at you? And so on this video, let's talk about emotionally disappearing, the need to create distance, and attachment distress. I'm Alan Robarge, an attachment-focused psychotherapist and a relationship educator, and I like to talk about how to heal attachment wounds and also improve our relationships. And this video is going to explore fearful avoidant attachment style and how we might have a tendency to want to emotionally disappear and withdraw and pull away from the other person that we're in relationship with. Now, you might also be on the receiving end, that you're the person who's being pulled away from. There's a lot of fear and insecurity and not being able to manage the inner turmoil that comes with the risks of vulnerability. We're talking about an adaptive behavior to manage attachment distress. And that's what a lot of us do, that intimacy and vulnerability are challenging, are overwhelming, are confusing, and exposes us. And if you have any history of being hurt in relationships, which many of us just raise our hands and say, well, yeah, that's really part of the experience. So that whenever there is an insecurity around practicing being vulnerable, and we need to employ an adaptive behavior response to protect ourselves, it's the default setting. It's at times a defensive stance. And we err on the side then of really needing to retreat and pull away. And this registers, this is what we would say shows up as a kind of avoidance, avoiding feeling your feelings, avoiding moving in the direction of vulnerability, avoiding letting in the intimacy that is being offered, avoiding the other person, avoiding yourself. Now, these characteristics, or what happens to show up, is that this fear of intimacy begins to send mixed signals. And chances are, if you yourself are experiencing some avoidance and fear, these mixed signals are also coming from an internal confusion where you're getting mixed signals from yourself. Get close, pull away, get close, pull away. This is also often referred to or explained as ambivalent relating. Now, ambivalence is something that can show up, it's a quality that can show up in multiple attachment styles. So it's not unique here because of the popularity of talking about attachment styles. Sometimes ambivalent is more linked to fearful avoidance, but it doesn't have to be. We can be ambivalent and preoccupied anxious. We can be ambivalent and dismissive avoidant. We can be ambivalent at times, come here, go away, come here, go away, if we have a disorganized attachment style. Imagine the same experience, not only how it's showing up and what you're communicating to the other, come here, go away, come here, go away, but also internally for yourself, trust, don't trust, get close, don't get close, open yourself up, close yourself off. This is safe, this is not safe. And this creates this tension. There's this inner tension, the word turmoil, and an inner turmoil. And over time, if you cannot release the pressure from the inner turmoil, if you cannot get some relief, if you cannot get breaks, and this inner turmoil just keeps building and building and building, chances are the avoidance and pushing the other person away, and also you emotionally disappearing, not only from the relationship, but from yourself as well, chances are you're going to increase the likelihood of doing this if you're not able to address the tension that's continually building with regards to this conflict, this internal conflict around, yes, be open, yes, let relationship in, yes, welcome the other, yes, allow yourself to be pursued and enjoyed and seen. And then at the same time, that tension, that fear of I am going to get hurt if I open myself up here. I am going to get hurt if I really reveal who I am. Or when I do reveal who I am going to be rejected. Now, something that's not really helpful about all this business about attachment styles and everybody talking, I mean, it's just this ongoing conversation as if, it's new. It's been around for a bit, and it doesn't need to be black and white. It doesn't need to be either or. It doesn't need to be an objectification of the other person by labeling them. You are fearful avoidant. I am fearful avoidant. Your partner is fearful avoidant. And there's even a kind of popularity to label people, to call them, to reference and say, my fearful avoidant, or even using an acronym, FA. The other day, my FA said, this is really problematic. This isn't helpful. We need to introduce the word sometimes. We need to introduce this idea of when there's arising conditions, and pretty much what that means is that attachment distress, a certain circumstance is happening, that attachment distress is really beginning to be too much and overwhelming, and we need to default to our adaptive style. Now, some people who fall into this category, what we call preoccupied anxious, the attachment, the adaptive approach to manage the intensity of the distress is to try harder to latch on to create closeness and to really hang on to the other person. It's what we would call a pursuer behavior. And now some of us also, and this might be you, has a bit more of an opposite approach of really needing to pull back and not be in the center of attention, not offer connection, but in fact to limit the amount of contact. And this is what we would say someone who is appearing to be avoidant. Now, this word avoidance has just really gotten a bad rap, and there's a lot of negativity. So there's judgment, there's aggression, there's even anger. And that oftentimes the approach is to believe that a person who's fearful avoidant is hurting you and trying to purposefully reject you, and they're even coming from a place of ill will, we might even say manipulation, and really trying to confuse you. Now, I can get on board and understand it's confusing because this is all based on mixed messages. And keep in mind that a person who's experiencing this level of fear around vulnerability, they're also a bit swimming in their own intentions and swimming in a state of confusion with regards to, is it safe or is it not safe to reveal themselves? These symptoms of attachment trauma, a hyperarousal, an intrusion, we also would say a constriction. Just as a quick segue also, this is content that I have shared before on a number of videos, and also created a course called the 4 Attachment Distress Responses. And those responses are poking, running, hiding, and submitting. So when we are experiencing, if this happens to be you, that you're noticing this great overwhelm and confusion, a response to try to get clarity, to try to get your footing, to try to make sense of this great overwhelm in your mind, in your body, the activation. There's a bit of a logic that says, I think I just need to remove myself. that all of these adaptive styles are coming from really a place of intelligence. When I'm working with clients, I say, what's the goodness of your avoidance? What's the goodness of responding in a fearful, avoidant way? And we're really trying to frame it from a neutral place and frame it from this adaptive style, this adaptive response idea that we're really just trying to get our feet under us and clear our mind and find a sense of safety so that we can return to being vulnerable. We can return to practice letting another person in, practice letting in influence, practice allowing ourselves to be seen, known, and heard, and then also mirroring through emotional curiosity for the other person as well, so that they also get the experience of feeling seen, known, and heard. But unfortunately, there's been some extreme interpretation that this is not so much an adaptive strategy grounded in some sense of taking care of oneself, even though that it can undermine trust, even though it can cut us off from relationship, and in the most severe cases can end and ruin a relationship. But if we're coming at this as a kind of pathology, as a label, as there's something wrong with you, you're inadequate, you're broken and you need fixed, and it's because you are fearfully avoidant, and it's because your avoidance that you're ruining the relationships. That's too aggressive, that's too harsh, that's too unhelpful, and that's not necessary. We need to find the crossover, we need to find the link through compassion of how we ourselves, all of us, I mean, maybe somebody's not, I haven't met them yet, that we're all emotionally unavailable to a certain degree. And whenever we have insecurity around being emotionally available and emotionally unavailable, we manage that insecurity differently. There's just different presentations, different behaviors. And when this happens, this is what we would call it, is a style. We don't need to think of it in terms of this person is broken, you're broken, you got to get fixed, and you got to be securely attached, because this is not going to show up all the time. We are not fearfully avoidant 24/7. This is not our personality. This is not a pathology. This is not defining who we are. It's simply an adaptive style that we employ every so often. So a good place to think to begin, even if this is not your more predominant way of showing up to manage your own vulnerability, but join this conversation, join this exploration by how are you yourself avoidant. And it's really fascinating when you start to do that research, when you start to do that introspection, when you look at yourself, we're going to find that, well, many of us employ avoidant behaviors. It might not show up as strongly as it does for some, maybe for your partner. It might not show up as strongly as when you're intensely in a space or place of feeling just flooded and overwhelmed with the confusion of opening and revealing yourself. These trauma symptoms, what we call in general these three categories of hyperarousal, intrusion, and constriction. Constriction is a tightening down, a clamping down. This can happen in your body. We can also call it a feeling of numbness. It's like our feeling just dissipates. We feel a strong wall. We feel guarded. We feel shut down. We feel constricted. And when this happens, we have myopic vision. We have very, very closed mind. When we are activated in a trauma response, we are not expansive. We don't have access to all of our functioning. We don't have access to our higher order thinking. We don't have access to all of our creative tools and abilities to see things clearly, to offer possibility, and to come up with creative ways to engage the other person that you're trying to be in relationship with, let alone engage yourself. So it's going to be very, very hard to, in the moment, reverse and just change the behavior. What's happening for many of us is that we need to do a kind of triage. It's very much a state of emergency. And perhaps for someone who's a bit more anxiously attached, they exhibit this urgency a bit differently with a greater outward expression, primal panic, creating protest behaviors, and really needing to get help, get connection. Please pay attention to what's going on because this is a lot. Now, for someone who's more avoidantly attached and managing this intensity by needing to shut down and distance and pull away, the presentation is not going to be as dramatic. It's not going to look as intense. There's going to be very much an implosion and a closing in on yourself. And some of us, we just need to check out. It's really, at times, when perhaps you're in conflict in relationship, it can even show up as a kind of trance, like you're entering this trance. So what we see is mixed messages coming out of all this confusion, and you don't quite know what you want. One minute you say you want one thing, the next minute you say you want something else. One minute you feel something, the next moment you feel the opposite. And not only are these mixed signals happening for you internally, that's how you're showing up and communicating to others. It's incredibly confusing for everybody. This creates a lot of inconsistent behavior. Sometimes you're acting like you're moving towards, and other times you're acting like you're moving away. This can bring up old previous attachment wounds, and those symptoms of attachment trauma get activated. And then at that point, we're not managing an attachment style, and we're not managing trying to create repair in a relationship and just be open or just be available or just be vulnerable. In that moment, it's not about the other person and about relationship. It's about attending to the activation in our nervous system and our body. And what I like to say is the nervous system feels fried, or the nervous system lights up like a Christmas tree. And now you're in this state of an activated body and needing to attend to these trauma symptoms and these old wounds, these old patterns that are showing up in your current present relationship. And sometimes it's more confusion on top of confusion because we're not able to create repair with the person who's right in front of us, create repair of the relationship that we're in right now. Because our mind is being hijacked by the old attachment wound, by the old attachment emotional flashbacks, the emotional memory in our body. And our body, our nervous system is screaming, this is not safe, this is not safe, this is not safe to get close, it's not safe to be available here. I need to shut down and I need to get out of here. And the person on the receiving end is really going to notice a very sudden withdrawal. And this is a characteristic of this fearful avoidant behavior, is just a sudden revolt, a disappearing in this sudden withdrawal. And you can imagine then, either you're on the receiving end, or if you're someone who at times does this, because it's not surprising, many of us do this, that if you emotionally disappear and you suddenly withdraw, imagine what that experience is like for the other person who loves you, who cares about you, who wants to be close with you. It's an experience where all of a sudden you're not there. Now, you might be there. It's what I call there, not there. You're physically there. You're in the room. You're sitting on the couch. You're walking through the kitchen. but you're also simultaneously, something is shut down and checked out, and you're not here. You're like, hello, you're really not here. Sometimes we might even hear ourselves sound a bit like a robot. Sometimes we might have a kind of non-feeling monotone. Sometimes we might only talk about facts and details and the chronology of a situation, and we're not able to share feeling words or to reflect on our inner world experience, as if there's this highway that allows us to enter our inner world, our inner landscape of feelings and emotions. It's as if this highway has been closed, and all that we have access to is speaking about data and facts and information. And then the other person on the receiving end is going to notice that it's like you just disappeared. Now, for some of us, if you're watching this and you happen to be on the receiving end and you're someone who is more anxiously attached, or we might even say preoccupied anxious attachment. I personally prefer always linking the word preoccupied with it. I think that's just like really helpful of not only the anxiety that's looping in your body, but there's this chronic looping of what's the status of the relationship. Where are we at? Where are we at? Is everything okay? Is everything okay? Where's the status of the relationship? And we're spending more time overly focused on other than we are ourselves. Now, it's very possible that you, even watching this video right now, you are in a state of your own panic and your anxious attachment has activated, and you're very preoccupied with thinking about what the other. And sometimes it manifests as a kind of codependency, meaning we're overly focused on other, what the other is or isn't doing, what the other is or isn't saying, what the other is or isn't thinking. And when we're so overly focused on other, we lose ourselves in the process. And for some of us, we do this so intensely that we either at times really pretzel ourselves. We change who we are to try to show up in a way that would get our attachment needs met and create a presentation that a person who's distancing from us can find a bit more digestible or manageable. And so in this self-betrayal process, we're manipulating how we can present ourselves, which means we're not being true to ourselves. Or in the worst case scenario, we've lost ourselves in the process. We're really completely overly focused on other. And chances are you might be watching this video right now because you're trying to do research on, okay, what's going on for them and their fearful avoidant attachment style. That's why a lot of all of these videos that have come out in the last number of years, they really take this attitude of talking about them, not talking about you, not talking about me, not talking about all of us that can relate and have some connection, some crossover, some human experience being avoidant, but instead objectifying a group of people, maybe your partner, maybe you, and turning them into a label, turning us into a label, turning you into a label. And this is very off-putting, and it is going to pretty much guarantee the thing we don't want. It's going to communicate telling the other person they have a deficiency. They're probably going to hear, you're probably going to hear, I'm probably going to hear, I'm inadequate. You know, say, hey, look, I looked up in a book, I've watched 8 videos, and I know it's right here, you are fearful avoidant, and you're behaving like this because you're not able to stay present with vulnerability, and in the process you emotionally disappear, and you shut me out, and it activates my anxiety, and so you just got to change. My way of relating is better. My relating is more based in emotional openness, and yours is about pulling away and not being very transparent. And I believe in being overly transparent. So we're going to approach this that my way is better and there's something wrong with you. Do you hear the aggression in that? Do you hear the the difficulty in creating any buy-in. If you're on the receiving end of this is not attractive. This is not collaborative. This is not a joining with. This is not compassionate. This is pretty much saying, I'm going to single you out as the identified patient, and we got to figure out how to make you change so I get my attachment needs met. Which brings in another flavor of all of this. A lot of our attachment wounds is the wound of the development of the self. It's the wound of the self. And we can start expanding outward and say, well, there's a narcissistic wound here. And I'm not talking about the overexploited information about narcissistic abuse, which is in itself is very problematic in its extremeness. It's not problematic in that it's trying to document abuse dynamics and to identify and be conscious of looking at abuse dynamics as power, the exploiting power in relationships, and how there is a process of belittling another person. A bit different. That's not what I'm talking about. But in all of this talk about, narcissism and narcissists, we're really losing sight of that pretty much all of us have a narcissistic wound. And again, this is not going down this extreme path of talking about personality disorders. When I'm activated in my attachment distress, and I'm not getting my emotional needs met, and I'm not getting my attachment needs met, and continuing to invite intimacy and practice intimacy, and then to be turned down or rejected, and there's a slowing down. There's not an expansive joining each other. Something has shifted, and we're missing each other. We're not creating a connection, and something has happened where there's now a pulling away and a distancing. For many of us, when we move into our trauma symptoms, our attachment trauma, and we get this very myopic, closed, disconnected from resource experience, what takes over is self-preservation. And what takes over is, I need to protect myself here. And that urgency can often present as, I got to get my needs met. I got to get my needs met. I need to take care of what I need to take care of. I must get connection. I must resolve the intensity of this disconnect by right of through anxious attachment, needing to move forward, or by right of avoidant attachment, needing to pull away. But I think I'm hoping that you're hearing and noticing that when we're in these activated states, either side of the negative cycle, either side of the distance or pursuer dynamic, that both parties are going to look incredibly self-absorbed. And so we disconnect from compassion, and all we can see is look at how our partner's hurting us through their distancing. And that because they're hurting us, we're being denied vulnerability, emotional connection, closeness, and secure attachment. And that all might be very true. Like, well, yeah, you are being denied it. But the dynamic is presented and explained that something is being done to you. And it's because they're selfish, and because they're self-absorbed, and it's because they're manipulating the moment, and they're in control of how much you're going to get your needs met. And it's because they are narcissistic. We turn the same, we can apply the same thing I just said. I was playing both sides of the fence. So you come across as narcissistic too. When our attachment needs are not met, and this is a wound of the development of the self, which is why we often talk about attachment in the context of maturing and maturity. And when we are very afraid and vulnerable and not getting our intimacy needs met, we oftentimes regress. We default to trying to get our needs met the way we did at earlier, younger stages when those needs also were not met or were rejected. And in a way, we return back to this more immature, regressed state, a younger self. And we're not operating from our adult self. We're not operating from all of our resources and higher executive functioning. We're pretty much drowning in this feeling of being rejected, in this feeling of being so greatly misunderstood, in this feeling of demands being placed on us that we cannot possibly meet. So for some of us, if we show up as a bit more fearful avoidant, our behavior then is going to be really inconsistent. We've already talked about these mixed messages. But the inconsistent behavior, if we're talking about regressing to younger states, this immature way of relating, and that's not a judgment. That's not trying to be judgmental. That's a hard word sometimes culturally. But simply to say that we don't really have skills for relating and managing vulnerability and intimacy beyond age 8, beyond age 11, beyond age 14, pick a number. And again, it doesn't mean that you're always coming from an 8-year-old place. It doesn't mean that you're always behaving like you're 14. It means in the most intense experiences of overwhelm regarding demands or requests or bids for attention, bids for connecting, if you perceive that it's just unmanageable and too much, and the demand that's being placed on you, the ask, is so scary, you might then default to handling the situation the way you did when you were 8 or 11 or 14. It doesn't mean that you're like this all the time. These are activated potentials depending on the situation, which again is why it's really not helpful to label someone, you are fearful avoidant, you are anxiously attached. It's not really helpful. I love the word sometimes. Sometimes we move into these states of being, these states of mind, the activated trauma mind. Sometimes we show up as fearful and we show up as avoiding connection and avoiding vulnerability. These mixed messages we're talking about can show up both overtly and covertly, meaning a bit hidden, a bit micro, not so obvious. We can think in terms of turning towards and turning away. This might literally be body language. You're sitting with someone, they're sitting with you, and you can either notice yourself and notice them. To what degree are you turning towards each other as a kind of invitation to be open and available? If we're in an activated state where we're trying to manage our attachment distress, and we also err on the side of using avoidance as a very skillful tool, this is a tool that helps us, then we might just be turning away from. And we might do it in such a way that we don't even know that we're doing it. We might do it in very, very subtle ways. Imagine turning away by only looking at your phone and texting, and the other person's there, and you're not even looking up, you're not even paying attention to them. But supposedly you're on a date, or supposedly you're interacting, or supposedly you're spending the evening together, and you are turned away from, you're not turned towards. Same thing, any kind of distraction of putting a TV between you and the other person, or having a TV compete between you and the other person, and choosing the TV over the other person. Now, does this mean that you can't watch TV and totally immerse yourself in a lovely drama or comedy? Of course not. But sometimes we're using these behaviors as distraction to fuel or endorse or strengthen or really employ this avoidant attachment style. Another very popular one that shows up here is what will look like busyness and what will look like workaholism. I can't get together because I just got so much to do. I'm so busy and I'm so stressed out and I'm so overwhelmed. So I'm going to have to cancel our date on Thursday because, I'm sorry, I just can't do it. Now, within reason, like life's hard, life's definitely busy. We have 800 things to do. That's true. But many times we're not honest with ourselves, we're not honest with the other person, and we might not even have the awareness, even the language to say, you know what, I'm really feeling exposed in our closeness and intimacy, that I have felt a great closeness. And as I continue to open myself up more and begin to trust you and you're trusting me, I'm actually freaking out. And behind the scenes, I'm noticing this intensity of fear that is taking over. I really need to practice buying myself some time to take a step back, to self-soothe, and to work on the intensity of this overwhelm. And I want to do it in a way that's not just going to be abrupt and sudden and where you're going to experience a shutdown and a withdrawal. Many of us don't even know we're doing it. Many of us don't have that language. Many of us don't have the skill to say that. So instead, what we say is, I gotta cancel. I know we're supposed to go to dinner, but I'm just swamped here at work, and yeah, I got this project. My boss just told me I got to get it done by tomorrow. So yeah, I'm not going to be able to get together tonight. And I don't know when this project's going to be done. So, I can't reschedule just right now, but I'll call you. I'll call you. It doesn't have to be the way I'm presenting it, like the person's like a player. But that's what on the receiving end. The person on the receiving end, if that happens to be you, it often feels like bullshit. Like, oh, bullshit. Please. You're now sending a mixed message and you're playing a game. Another mixed message that often comes up here is talking about an investment in the relationship and then 2 days later saying something as if you're not invested in the relationship, making statements about the status of the relationship, like you're becoming partners, you're on track to be partners, you're thinking of the other person as boyfriend, girlfriend, same thing, the person you're with might be surprising you and like, oh, I guess we're boyfriend, girlfriend now. I guess we're girlfriend, boyfriend, all of the, different combinations that can be created here. And this sometimes can be really confusing because 2 days ago, the behavior was a turning away from, the behavior was more of a distancing, the behavior was sending this kind of mixed signals around available, not available, available, not available. Again, we come back to this ambivalence. And now we're hearing there's these statements like, how about on the holidays, we go away on let's take a weekend trip on the holidays. And let's say the holidays are 3 months away. And you hear this and you think, okay, I guess we're starting to invest in each other's lives. And then 2 weeks later, you find, the same person says, maybe it's you, maybe it's the partner says, yeah, I made arrangements to go visit my friend at the holidays, and I'm going to be out of town. What? And there's a shock. Again, it's that experience of something's not lining up here. And these mixed messages, conscious or not, intentional or not, they're really designed to create a lot of confusion. and ultimately push the other person away. Don't think that we're close. I might say things that imply that I want to get close, but also I'm frightened of getting close. Something else that we can explore here is about accepting influence. And perhaps we would explore that in a way of being able to integrate information that the other person is giving us. It might show up sometimes if it's around negotiation, a kind of compromise. And to be able to hear some feedback about how we're interacting, about ourselves. And when we think we want something and that we think we're going to give something to the other person, and the other person says, hey, wait a minute, I'd like to do it a little differently. And you thought you were going to show up this way. I want to make a suggestion and a request. How about you show up this other way? And if you can handle that and you don't shut down, push them away and freak out and go into this trauma cycle, but instead you say, okay, I'm going to think about that. Or you say, please tell me more. Or you say, well, at face value, hearing what you say sounds like a bit of a stretch for me, but I'm really willing to hear how might we incrementally work towards that. So there's a willingness to collaborate. This is what we might say, accept influence. It might also be around feeling states, and this might get a little conceptual and more challenging, but if you're closed off and you're angry and you're just not having a good day, and a partner says, I'd like to be supportive of you, I'd like to hear what's going on, and if you're willing to let me in, I'm willing to listen. And I understand it's a risk to share what's going on for you, but hey, I'm dating you, I'm your partner, we're in this together, and yeah, I can be a support. And in that moment, emotionally, to be able to accept influence would be to accept the offer and say, you know, that might be a little challenging for me. It sounds a little scary, but I could use a friend. And I'm going to experiment with opening myself up. When we accept influence, or with the other person, we also assert influence by letting them know our needs and what we want. This is the opposite of presenting rigidity. This can come up very easily with regards to time and how you're negotiating the use of your time. And if you're in a state of, if you're feeling really activated around being avoidant, fearfully avoidant, and vulnerability is so overwhelming, any kind of suggestions around your time feel like it's imposing, feels like it's almost like you're going to be smothered, you're going to be taken advantage of, and that you just can't manage that the other person is requesting to be a part of your life. But if you perceive it as taking something away from you, you're then going to want to present a bit closed off, a bit more rigid, and that your time, your attention is inflexible. And the person on the receiving end is going to experience that as a rejection. Something else that's really important to note here is what we talk about, differentiation. And what this has to do with is the ability to retain and maintain a sense of autonomy and individuality, while also still having the capacity and the ability to join via connection, via attachment, to create closeness. And there's oftentimes a internal struggle in that if I give over to this connection and to this joining and allow myself to be so attached to the other person that I somehow then am going to have to forfeit, give up, and deny my sense of self. And so we pit those two against each other, and we perceive the other person, we perceive having the experience of close connection, secure attachment, as actually suspect, and it's fear-based, because it means the longer we stay here, notice, this connection, the longer we stay here, we're going to have to give up a sense of individuality and autonomy. Now, who wants to do that? It's very black and white thinking. What we talked about at the beginning of this video, a lot of these ideas, talking about attachment styles, creates this very black and white thinking. And at times, if you're grappling with a need to put up a wall, to retreat, to pull away, and to keep yourself unavailable, oftentimes it's because you're going to tell yourself the story and you're going to feel that, well, the other person is smothering me. The other person wants me to make this grand, big commitment. You might start talking in terms of that, the other person is rushing the relationship. The other person is making a bigger commitment. And then those mixed messages might come in that you might say things to really push the person away, as if like, no, we're not in a committed relationship. No, I don't know what you're talking about. We weren't on track to be partners. I thought we're just casually dating. I've heard that a lot in very painful therapy sessions with clients. Is that what initially is presented is, no, we're dating and we're open to connection, we're open to practicing vulnerability. When this fear kicks in and the avoidant behaviors kick in, there's a very quick, abrupt diminishing the connection that was established, and instead trying to make it very casual and unimportant and of not very much significance. Although the behaviors up to this point, and even some of the mixed messages, the behaviors have said, no, this is significant. We are on track to practice loving each other. We are on track to practice vulnerability. So this word differentiation, what it means is the ability to hold the tension between these two, the need for connection and attachment and merging, the need to feel a closeness, the need to be in a relationship and say, we're a we, and we notice our ego boundaries and our sense of, we do sort of merge with the other person. Now, sometimes that's really elating and it's warm and beautiful, and other times it's like, oh man, that's gross. I don't want to merge with anybody, and get away from me. I'm an individual. I need to be an individual because I have my own needs, my own desires, and I'm not always referencing things according to how you feel or what you want or how you think that we're connected. It's also, I need to know that I have this autonomy, because otherwise I feel smothered and I feel taken advantage of, and I just feel like I can't be me. So the way I've learned, the adaptive style that I've learned, is I'm going to very quickly reject you. And I'm going to reject everything that represents this close bond, this attachment, this merging. And I'm just very quickly going to withdraw. I'm going to suddenly withdraw because I need to say, I'm a self, I'm an individual. And it's going to appear very perhaps stoic, perhaps angry, perhaps rejecting of the other person. And we can talk about this in terms of, well, you're not doing a good job holding the tension between the two. And remember how earlier I said the word sometimes is like really, really helpful. We're talking about these behaviors. Sometimes they come up. Another word I use in therapy a lot with clients is one of my favorite words, is the word both. And differentiation is about both. It's about expanding your consciousness and expanding that you have many needs. And we need both. We do need connection. We do need relationship. We do need to risk and practice vulnerability to enjoy another person in our life so that we feel that we can be in relationship. And we also simultaneously need to protect ourselves from feeling overwhelmed by that relationship, and that we are not being smothered, and that we can promote our individuality, we can affirm our autonomy, but not by needing to pick one or the other, or rejecting the other, or rejecting the person. We just say, I have the capacity, I have the ability to hold both in my mind. And when we do that, we say, connection, relationship, attachment, vulnerability, intimacy is so important. I love when we have that. And I'm also noticing right now, I'm losing myself and feeling a bit overwhelmed by the intensity. And instead of blaming you for smothering me, I think what I'm going to do is practice self-soothing. I'm going to stay connected to you, but also acknowledge, I really think I need the next 2 or 3 days to go inward and do some self-soothing. And instead of rejecting you, pushing you away, shutting you out, behaving in a very avoidant way, I'm going to negotiate a healthy distancing and a healthy separation, because we can have both. We can hold a need to endorse and nourish and affirm our individuality, while simultaneously saying, relationship looks really good. And as human beings, that's really nice to feel a sense of closeness and connection. I want to share a couple ideas that come out of working with couples. It could be, perhaps I might use individuals, examples of working with individuals in therapy. And I think I'll preface this by something that's happened many, many times with clients over the years. Inevitably, when a client in an individual session who has some errs on the side of being fearful avoidant to manage their attachment distress, when we are in the therapeutic relationship and we're talking about what's going on, and there's an immediacy and a presence, and it's very vulnerable in this process, in the therapeutic process, they are going to want to run. And sometimes they just leave and don't come back. They say, well, therapy doesn't work for me, or I don't like the therapist, or, that's just, I'm just not interested. Now, sometimes if the client is able to verbalize that, and perhaps I will also see it in the moment. I can see they're beginning to check out. I can see their leg is starting to bounce, a lot of anxiety. I can see that they're looking around. I can see they're getting hot and fidgety. And I'll say, what's going on with your body? What's going on? And if the client can voice it and figure it out and be able to put words to it, might say, I just want to escape. I just want to run. So I say, good. That is so intelligent of you. You want to take care of yourself by getting out of here. And so for years with clients, I've said, could you please leave? You know where the door is. I generally often lived in apartment buildings in cities. So I say, go in the hallway, take the elevator downstairs, walk around the block. I want you to trust this impulse to get out of here, that there's intelligence, there's a goodness, there's a purpose to protecting yourself. And this is a wonderful skill that you have used throughout your whole life and has helped you manage attachment distress. And it's a wonderful tool that you use to be able to regulate an overactivated nervous system. So let's just not sit there and make your body go into an overdrive, overheated, antsy, white-knuckling it, intense period. If your body wants to move, let's move. Let's connect your body with your experience. Let's not override that. So I say, will you please, I'm really encouraging you, will you please leave and just take a break. Listen to your body to create some distance. Now here's the invitation. At some point, return. At some point, come back. And I'm hoping it's within 5 or 10 minutes. That's the invitation. But if you want to walk out the door and go to your car and leave altogether and you don't come back at all, well, okay, that's it. If that's the case, I hope to hear from you and you're still on the calendar for the next session. I want to empower you to have choice. These adaptive strategies, adaptive styles around managing our attachment to stress are often defensive behaviors where we are on autopilot and we are acting out of great intensity of distress. We're not making a choice of how to use that very good tool and skill of needing to buy ourselves some time and create some distance in a way where we collaborate or in a way where it's a conscious negotiation. Instead, we're more coming from a place where it's very reactionary. So in the therapeutic process, we're not telling a person to change and not do that. We're saying, how can you do it with a sense of consciousness? How can you do it as a response of choice and not an extreme overreaction where you're being driven almost unconsciously to distance yourself from a person who loves you or from a person that you say that you love or from a relationship that's giving you some sense of nourishment and emotional connection. Now, this same idea, the reason why I share it like this is because it's shown up a lot for me with clients in this individual sense. But the same thing can happen in a couple session during relationship repair. And that ultimately what we want to do is that when we're activated in our very particular attachment distress response and in our particular style of needing to manage the intensity of a vulnerability that feels so out of control, we don't want to go into a shutdown autopilot or a trauma trance where we are behaving mindlessly and acting out these old patterns. We might still need to employ the old pattern, but we want to figure out how can we do it with choice and mindfulness and consciousness. And the big key, the big challenge here is with some sense of communication and announcing that we're going to do it. Because if you have a partner, and let's say you're fearful avoidant and this is kicking in and you really need to bail on vulnerability, you're getting ready to share a bunch of mixed signals and mixed messages and you're getting ready really to like shut down and all of a sudden withdraw from the relationship. It can be incredibly healing and empowering to do that with some sense of grace and strategy and intention, and practicing still staying connected to the person that you say you're in a relationship with and that you care about. And that it might initially still look the same. You might still withdraw, you might still be distant, you might shut down. But what we want to do is to be able to let the other person know, I think I'm going to disconnect for a while. I'm really struggling here to manage this vulnerability. And the way that I'm experiencing this vulnerability is that I'm somehow going to lose myself. And that then you have more power. And you're somehow taking something from me. And I judge you as smothering me. When in fact, instead of judging you, it's because I'm so afraid to allow myself to accept influence, to allow myself to feel the warm, reliable connection that you're offering. That is just too much, too scary. And yes, I know I did it last weekend. And yes, I know I did it 2 weeks ago. But it's just all caught up with me. So, I'd like to practice needing to distance, but not shut you out. If that happens in a therapy session with a couple, and the person who's feeling a bit fearful avoidant has that same intensity in their body and their nervous system. And I ask and say, well, what do you want to do in this moment? And they say, well, I really just want to get out of here. Then we will do the same exercise that I just shared with you and say, okay, negotiate it with your partner and get out of here. And the invitation is, could you come back in 5 or 10 minutes? Or if you really need to leave altogether, could you let us know before you leave? And can you leave with a sense of valuing the other, not shutting the other out? And many, many times working with couples, working with clients, one partner will leave, walk around the block, and then come back. And there's a really helpful conversation that follows, because I can say, hey, what was it like for you when you left us? How did you feel? What was it like when you took a walk by yourself? What did you think about? What did you feel? What did you notice? Did you think about your partner? Did you think about how you can continue to practice still protecting yourself, but stay connected with your partner? Something, a variation of this exercise that I also think is really helpful is that we do role reversal and really put the other partner, whose tendency is not to be fearful avoidant, but to simulate or try to understand what it's like to be put, in their partner's shoes, and for them to practice these behaviors of distancing. And so if it's not the client's first, the other partner's first intention, likelihood that they would want to take a break and pull away, I say, well, let me suggest and invite that. Well, why don't you do that? And why don't you practice being a bit more like your partner who's showing up as fearful avoidant? And you'll get a chance to see what might it be doing for them. Because oftentimes the person on the receiving end, when the fearful avoidant person needs to distance, they, what we've already talked about, get very overly activated in how their needs are not getting met. And they become very myopically focused on their being rejected, and that there's this withholding that's occurring. And so on the receiving end, it feels like you lose agency. You feel like you have no power. You feel like the other person has all the power, that they're making the choices about time. They're making the choices about when we see each other. They're making the choices about when we call and connect. And that can be very upsetting. So what we're trying to do is increase potential for agency. Agency is, what can I do? Agency is the ability to act, the ability to respond, not react, but that we actually have some choices here. And we can still err on the side of saying, I gotta figure out how to manage this vulnerability. It is too much. But in so doing, I don't need to shut the other person out. I don't need to shut down. I don't need to reject the relationship. I don't need to just suddenly withdraw and end the relationship. I mean, that's also a manifestation of the mixed messages. Couples, oftentimes when this is really severe, get into this pattern of on again, off again relating, on again, off again relationship. It's over, it's totally over. And then 2 days later, when they're not as activated, okay, it's not over. Okay, we're back together. And then 3 days later, when the vulnerability is really scary, and the request for intimacy is perceived as a demand, it's over. I can't do this. I just can't be in a relationship. I just don't have these skills. I'm sorry. I thought I could. I thought this is what I wanted, but no, this is not what I want. And we just got to end now. That just frightens everybody. It's not a very graceful way to manage relationship. What we're doing at that point when we're on again, off again, is we're really just constantly activating each other's nervous system. And sometimes we just feel fried. It's just we're just constantly triggering each other into states of extreme fear and panic. And then that in and of itself becomes a cycle. Well, we've been talking about like certain skills to use. So one is really working with the body, working with body distress, paying attention to trying to understand how to manage the activation in the nervous system. And in that moment, that's not about having this really great big conversation about what happened, who said what you know, and negotiating something. It's not talk based. It can have some talking to it. It's really more feeling based and needing to find a sense of safety in your body. When we are fearful avoidant, when we are anxiously attached, we are not safe. Relationship is not safe. Vulnerability and intimacy are not safe. So body distress, this activation in the nervous system, requires certain skills of attending to breath and being present and grounding ourselves and really relating in the present moment. That's not the time to make some big declaration of what is or isn't the state of the relationship. We're just trying to calm our heartbeat down that's jumping out of our chest. Or we're trying to calm down the overreaction of needing to get in the car and just drive away and never tell your partner where you're going for 5 days, where everybody gets freaked out because now all of a sudden you just cut all ties. The example I gave of working with clients, either individually or as a couple, is distancing becomes a choice. We're trying to use it as a tool and then figure out what our options are of how we use that tool. It's not necessarily a defensive response that is rooted in trauma, where we are mindlessly pushing people away and mindlessly behaving in an avoidant way. But instead, we're not just getting rid of it. We're using it. Another example here, and this just came up recently with a client who we were talking about eye contact, and something really helpful in relationship is during greetings and endings, when you come into a connection with someone, and then let's say the evening is coming to a close, or it's time to go about your day and you're going to be separating. Creating eye contact and just acknowledging these transitions. We were close for the last 2 hours. We were on a date for the last 2 hours. We were enjoying each other for the last 2 hours, and now things are coming to a close. And instead of ending abruptly, what's really helpful is to be able to acknowledge each other and say, okay, our time is shifting here. I'm going to go out and live my life and do my thing. And thank you so much for this time. And there's a transition period. And sometimes this doesn't have to be verbal. Sometimes this is just like literally like you hug each other, you look at each other. You're acknowledging this transition. And sometimes when we're fearful avoidant, sometimes when we're anxiously attached, we don't have the tolerance to manage these goodbye moments or these greeting. It doesn't have to only be goodbye. It could be the greeting as well of like, hello, nice to see you, good to see you. And we're opening ourselves up to connection and vulnerability. So with a client recently, he discovered, he was talking about how he wants to increase and invite more eye contact with his partner. They happen to be married, they've been married for a while. And he's really surprised, based upon his history, that this is even something that he wants, and that he realizes, I'd like to experiment with that a little more. And as we talked about it, imagining how we could use eye contact to communicate more of our presence and to invite the other person in, he started to get, I could see it in the session, I could see his anxiousness, his discomfort. And he looked fearful. And he didn't quite know what was going on. And I said, I'm wondering if this idea of inviting more eye contact is actually raising your anxiety. And this is a little scary for you, because you use non-eye contact, you use checking out, you use looking away, you use staring at the ground and not being available as a way to manage your attachment distress in your marriage. And you've been doing it for years. You sometimes just check out and you're in a trance and you don't look at other family members, you don't look at your partner, and you're off in your own little world. And you're doing that because that's how you can manage the demands for intimacy and how vulnerable it feels to be in this relationship. And if you and I are talking about, well, you're going to change that, you're going to mix that up, you're actually not going to spend as much time in this distracted, looking away state. You're going to try to practice more looking at and inviting in. I'm wondering if the fear is that you're giving up the goodness of this really great tool that you've been using for years to manage distress. And that has got to be scary to think in terms of if you're giving that up. So maybe you and I are negotiating, you're not giving it up. That is a wonderful skill. That is how that you survived in your family. You've spent many years perfecting how you can check out by not giving eye contact and not looking. And a lot of that history, it was done a bit mindlessly and also in a disregard to the other person. So what if you don't have to do it the same way, but you also don't have to give it up. And sometimes you can announce and communicate to your partner and say, I think I'm going to do that thing where I put on the headphones and I sort of space out and I'm not really interacting. And when I do that, I'm not really looking at you. And I want to let you know I need some kind of rejuvenation. I need to recharge. I need to find my center because I'm feeling really overwhelmed by the level of intimacy that we've experienced in the last so many days. So there's goodness. These behaviors we can put in the context of saying they're problematic and hurtful and they're not necessarily very helpful. But we can also put them in the context to say, when aligned with the choice and mindfulness, there's still an inherent goodness about where this is coming from. It's a way to try to protect ourselves and manage distress in relationship so that we can continue to stay and be in relationship. Thank you so much for listening. This is part of a series, the attachment styles and relationship repair and couples counseling, a series of videos that I'm making. Please do all the things, and you know what I'm talking about. That means click like, subscribe to this channel, leave a comment. I really put a lot of effort and passion and invest energy and time into this video. So if you do get benefit, if you're valuing from this offering, then please go ahead and leave a comment and let me know that you like it. That really helps circulate the video, or post the link somewhere else just so that other people can find it. It would really be wonderful to spread this information. I hope that it was helpful. There are more videos on the way, and thank you so much for listening.